Oh my goodness. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our next design skills workshop with our mentor, Kieran Black. Today, we are going to be going over basically how do you be a designer while working remotely, how to work remotely as a designer. I am Emily. I am the current student and community advisor for Designlab, and I am co-hosting today with Kieran. Really quick, so just going over the format. So Kieran is basically going to take it away for us for the next hour or so. Could be a little bit under, but we encourage everyone to post their questions in the questions tab on the right side of the screen. Please don't forget to introduce yourselves. We'd love to know who you are, if you're with us as a student now, or if you're looking at us, as an opportunity to kind of grow your skill set. Either way, we'd love to meet you. And as people post questions, if there are questions that, a lot of you want to hear the answer to, please upvote them just so we know to kind of prioritize them. In the chat tab, Kieran has shared some resources and links for you guys to kind of check out later on. So feel free to kind of open those, bookmark them, however you see fit, and then we will actually get started. I'm going to hand this over to Kieran.
Awesome. Hey, everyone, and thanks for that, Emily. Let's dive right in. So what I'm going to do to start off with is share my screen. So let's do that. And let's go to my application window and let's go to Chrome. Perfect. Okay. So as Emily said before, we're going to be talking today a little bit about working remotely as a UX designer. As well as like what she mentioned there is, the talk's going to go around like 30 minutes. Q&A, we've got about 30 minutes as well. So don't forget to put your questions in the questions tab. All right, so let's jump into personal experience. So my personal experience working as a remote designer. What I really wanted to talk about today is from that perspective, because everybody's experience is different. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just trying to sort of just collaborate, collect and grab all the remote sort of like resources. I wanted to sort of like also talk from my experience as well. So let's dive into that. So the last couple of years, like I've been a designer, like working in a company. So I haven't always worked remotely. So for about 6 years plus another like 3 years, I was working in a company, and that was like physically like in a company, right? Just like the traditional sort of job. Then from 2016 to 2017, I was working remotely for a few companies here in Australia while they were in the US in San Francisco. So that was like a bit of freelance work. That was a little bit of like agency work and so on. And then right now I'm working as a freelancer sort of contractor for Designlab, as well as doing my own freelance work as well for other companies, like in terms of like my clients. And that's what I've been doing from the sort of like November 2019 till the present. So I've sort of ridden that wave of all the virus stuff going on right now, but it's been one hell of a ride. So let's dive into some of the pros and cons that I've sort of seen over the last like year and a half of working remotely. So really, some of the pros here: you get more time in the day. That's a pretty big given, right? Because you're not really like, as I sort of mentioned a little bit later, there's no commute, there's no getting ready like for the day, there's no coming back from the day and sort of like relaxing and all that kind of stuff. So you gain about an hour to maybe even 2 hours to maybe even 3 hours, depending on your commute and how long it takes for you to get ready. And you don't realize like how much how much more time there is in the day because of that. In some cases, you actually earn more money. Because you're able to claim things on tax, you're able to save money like without going for the commute. You spend less money on gas and fuel and all that kind of stuff. you're able to use some of the money. You're able to claim some of the things on tax, like your electricity bill, maybe some of your rent on tax because of this. So there's a few ways that you can actually make more money because of it. And in my case, there's a foreign exchange in terms of currencies, the US dollar to the Australian dollar. So there's all of those kinds of things to take into consideration. You get to work the way that you want to. This is like a really big thing. For a lot of people, it's really hard to be creative between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 a.m. 5 p.m. Sorry, 9 a.m. So that's a very like specific window to be creative now. That's not how that sort of works, as you may have figured. It's really hard to brute force creativity. As I mentioned, no commute. There's no microwave fish in the office kitchen. That's a really big one. I don't know how many of you guys have worked in an office environment, but yeah, that's a really big one. No steamed vegetables or anything like that just smell like feet. It's great. There's more time to run errands. There's more time for cooking. So you're not like eating crappy food anymore. Like there's less stress about being creative between the hours of 8 and 4 or 9 and 5, and you're able to like exercise more and have more family time. So really, like generally you get more of a lot of things, which is really great. But there are some cons. So in a home environment, there's different types of distractions now. So instead of some guy with his music too loud, or like I said, the smell of the kitchen and all that kind of stuff, there might be kids running around. There might be a dog barking across the street. There might be like some guy with his lawnmower, like whatever the case may be. There's all kinds of distractions that tend to occur. Work-life balance can actually be harder in some cases. What I mean by that is because you don't have the cues of, hey, you should take a break now. There are like you can actually work longer, and that can actually be worse. You can get into the zone and then like forget what time it is. So you gotta like keep yourself checked on that one. You have to be a lot more organized. So like there's nobody sort of like breathing down your neck and telling you do this, do that, so on and so forth. So there isn't the sort of like, not that like everybody's breathing down in your neck at work, but like more so that because there's people walking around you, there's people looking at your screen as they walk past, and usually designers have big like massive 27-inch iMacs and stuff like that. It's very easy to see what you're doing on your screen. So just with that sort of like oversight, you tend to stay focused more. Like you're not checking Facebook, you're not checking Instagram, you're not checking whatever the case may be. So you do have to be a lot more organized. You do have to stay a lot more focused. You have to over communicate. This is like one of the things that can be really hard for people, especially if you're introverted. You have to go out of your way to communicate a lot. It can be expensive to start. So if you don't have a full-on room, like if you don't have a computer that is just like the work computer, like if you don't have all of these things, like I have like a mic on here, I have a webcam, I have a monitor, I have a stand for the webcam, I've got like a stand for the headphones, I've got headphones, I've got like the Mac Mini, I've got an actual desk, like, and then I've got a full-on room for this. All of that is really expensive. And if you don't already have that, it can be expensive to start. So yeah, just be aware of it. It's not all rainbows and butterflies. So and it also can be isolating for people. So if you're more of an extroverted person and you like to like meet with people, you like to socialize and all that kind of stuff, it can be quite isolating. And I know we're all getting a taste of that at the moment, but doing it for a very long stretch can be worrying for a lot of people. A lot of people can't be alone with themselves. But for me, it's not a huge deal. I like being alone. So it's not a big con for me, but it can be for certain others. All right. So let's talk about like the work-life balance, but let's start off with work, and like how you can like stay productive and a few other little tips around that. So when you're working remotely, you do really have to be transparent. Like transparency is key. We're all human and we need to own up to our mistakes and know when to reach out to each other for support. Like this is really, really like key for having a really good working relationship with the rest of your team. People being transparent with you and you being transparent with them. If you're if there's some like tasks that you cannot do, like let people know, like do that, reach out. Communication. So if there's one thing that remote work will teach you, it's how to communicate. You have to. There's so many different ways that you can communicate, but there's just no way to not communicate. Like you have to put yourself out there and communicate with each other. So that might be communicating up the chain. So in my case, that's been like when I'm trying to communicate to managers and so on. So that might be a project management tool. So something like Jira or Trello or Asana or whatever the case may be. There might be daily check-ins, like a stand-up, or weekly check-ins, depending on the company. Amongst your peers, there might be one-on-ones or one-to-many meetings. There might be daily check-ins again, like stand-ups. It's a way to keep track of like who's doing what at what time, and am I blocking you from doing what you need to do, or vice versa, and go from there. And if you're managing people, like having one-on-ones and like one-to-many meetings is also a really good way to keep a track of like what everybody's up to and how you can help them and all that kind of stuff. Trust. So trust is like, it sounds corny, but it's a two-way street, right? Your team relies on you and you rely on your team. Like if there's no trust in the team, then you're not really going to get far. If your manager doesn't trust you and you don't trust your manager, or if you don't trust your peers and your peers don't trust you, or your the people that are underneath you in like in management, and you don't trust them and they don't trust you, then there's a problem there, and you need to fix that. But the trust really comes down to being reliable, right? If you can be reliable, that's the main thing that we're going to be looking for, is that you show up on time. You like when you say you're going to do work, you do the work. When you say you're going to communicate something, you communicate something. Like that trust is really, really key to working remotely. And know yourself. Like know what you're good at, know what you're bad at. If you lack any of these skills, like train yourself out of them. So for me, like I know, like in chats and meetings, I can come across like pretty like either deadpan or like angry even. I sort of have resting female dog face. Like that for me is like something that like I can't really work on because it's just my face. That's what it is. And I also have a pretty dry sense of humor. So when I say something and mean it as a joke, and I'm not doing it through video and audio where I can laugh about it, I like overuse like emoji to make sure that people realize that I'm joking. So that's where I like type in ha 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 like a million times, and then use like crying, rolling face, and all that kind of stuff. Like that's what I sort of try to do. Is like if you know like how you come across in chats and meetings, make sure that you're doing that, because a lot of nuance can be lost when everything's remote. Body language gets removed, like tone might get removed. So use that to make sure that you're filling in those gaps. All right. So documentation is everything. So like documentation will save you every time. Like organize it, optimize it, automate it, and outsource it. So what I mean by that is if you're able to organize like sitemaps and personas and user flows and all this kind of stuff, you're able to then like make those into maybe like templates, and you're able to optimize that that documentation process, and you're able to then like automate it or like outsource it. So you might be able to like automate like how you create a sitemap, for example, because there are programs out there that help you do that. You might be able to outsource it to, so give it to one of your peers or give it to someone like under your management, and do that. But you've documented it so well that it's just a list of steps to do. So like that's the kind of thing that you sort of like go through. So organize, optimize, automate, and outsource this documentation process. It will save you so much time in the long run. As I sort of mentioned, like staying focused is really hard when you're working remotely. So environment, like your environment itself and the goal setting that you have is like really key here. So the environment, in my case, I'm very lucky to live in Australia where we actually have room to spread out. Like I live in a pretty big house, but I'm in the middle of nowhere in terms of like the city and stuff like that. So I have a little bit more room to spread out. So I actually have a dedicated room, and yeah, not everybody has the luxury of that. So what I sort of say with the environment thing is, you don't necessarily need a specific room for this, right? It might be like headphones. Like headphones might be able to like isolate you and make you focus. It might even just be that you're able to close a door on something, right? Like you might be, it might be that you have to work in the kitchen, or you might have to work on like in your bedroom, but like have some sort of way to shut off the rest of the world. Whether that's like headphones, whether that's like putting up like just like a rug or something like that to sort of like block the doorway, like whatever it is, like to make people realize that you're in the zone, you're doing work right now, you shouldn't be disturbed. That's what I'm talking about for environment. Of course, like the more that you can optimize that and like figure out the way that you work. Try not to like work on your bed, for example. Like try not to cross-contaminate those sort of like work versus play kind of areas. So things like the lounge room, try not to do it on the lounge room or on the bed or anything like that, because those are the things where your mind is sort of saying like, hey, these are relaxed places, like these are chill zones. And you're then sort of like saying, no, brain, you're wrong. It's actually a work thing. So your brain is going to be split between those two things. It seems silly and it seems like hippy dippy, but it really does work if you sort of like say, no, this is my dedicated workspace, whether that's a room, whether that's a bench, whether that's whatever. And this is my work gear, like my headphones, my laptop setup, like whatever it may be. Like set that in stone. And then same with goal setting, right? Everybody's different as to how they want to do goals. Some people use sticky notes. Some people use like Asana or Trello or Jira or whatever the case may be. Like whatever it is, just have a plan. Like have something that you use and that you're able to tick off and work towards some sort of bigger milestone. That's the big takeaway there. All right. So now that we've talked about working remotely, let's talk about like living remotely. So that work-life balance again. So really physical health and mental health are like two of the biggest things here. So make sure to take breaks for exercise and eye strain and be well rested. So things like the commute, even though you might be sitting down for 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever the case may be, you're still walking from your house to the bus or your house to the train or your house to an Uber or whatever the case may be. You're still doing that like 5 minutes, 10 minutes of exercise. Then from the bus or the Uber or the train or whatever the case may be, going from there to your workplace is another like 5 or 10 minutes. So already you've done like between 10 and 20 minutes of exercise, right? When you're not doing that, you're literally coming from your bedroom to here. For me, it's about like 5 meters. So that's about, I don't know, just over 15 feet, like it, or just under 15 feet. So it's like nothing. So it's not it's not that far of a commute for me. So I don't really get in that exercise. So I have to force myself to take that break to do that exercise, and to do that myself. Also, eye strain. Again, like you don't realize like how many times you're not looking at the computer in a real work environment. You might like stop to talk to your coworker that might be right next to you. You might stop to make a coffee or jump into a meeting or whatever else. But when you're like remotely working, you're constantly looking at the screen. So it's good to take a beat and look somewhere else, focus on something else that's really far away, and readjust your eyes so that the eye strain doesn't kick in. And the last one is to be well rested. So this comes down to having a good sleep schedule and having good sleep hygiene in general. So although you don't have to be creative between 9 and 5, try not to be creative between 5 and 9, right? Like it's going to be one of those things where if you get completely out of sync with everybody else, that can be like a different type of problem. But it also means that you're not getting enough sleep and you're not performing to the best of your ability. And creativity relies heavily on your brain working really well, like being able to creatively solve problems, like create awesome like UI designs and illustrations and icons and whatever else. Your brain needs to be well rested to heal and to recover. Mental health. So very similar to what I was talking about with the sleep schedule. Like having a schedule in terms of when you go to sleep, when you work, when you play, when you eat, all of that kind of stuff can be really good for your mental health, to give you some sort of routine. Because like as again, everybody is getting a little bit of a taste right now, it can seem like the days melt into each other, right? So having that routine and like doing something on Monday, doing something on Wednesday, doing something on Friday gives you that nice like bookend to the week, to sort of say like, okay, this is the day that I do this thing. This is the day that I do that thing, and you don't lose track of the days, because that can be like really, really tough for people, and screw with their head. Stay social. So be with your family and your friends as much as you possibly can. It's a good way to get outside of that. If you're friends with work people, that's perfectly fine. But just stay social, because it can be, again, like isolating. It can be like bad for your mental health. And know when to reach out for help. So like we're also going through a little bit of like anxiety right now, or at different levels depending on your country and all that kind of stuff. But know when to reach out for help. Like it's harder for a lot of people to know when that is. But if you stay connected to people and you don't isolate yourself, like I think it's something that you can keep at bay and you can talk about with people and do that. So your mental health is really important for this, because if you're not feeling well mentally, that can also affect you physically, and it can also start to affect your work life as well. So it's really important overall. So overall, like, is remote working for you? And it's not for everyone, right? It can be hard, like I sort of mentioned. So can you work alone without talking to someone for 8 hours? Like, is that a thing, or are you what we call in Australia a chatty Cathy, right? Like, do you like to talk to everybody as you're going through? Like, when you're making a coffee, do you need to talk to everybody, right? Are you able to keep an open dialogue with your team and clients, right? Are you able to communicate with them effectively? Are you self-motivated and self-managing? Can you do all these things without someone telling you to do them? That's really, really important. And there's also a few considerations before you start working remotely. And things like what and when and how will you get paid? Like, are you going to get paid weekly? Are you going to get paid fortnightly? Are you going to get paid monthly? If you're getting, like, for me, like, I get paid in US dollars to Australian dollars. So there's some tax implications in Australia for that. So just like knowing like what to do there. So have a good tax agent. That's a really good one. And know like if there are any transaction costs or anything like that, that might be cutting into your bottom line. PayPal's pretty good with that. It doesn't do that too much, but yeah, know what you're getting yourself into. What benefits will you get? Do you get healthcare, software, training courses, equipment, and so on? Some remote workers get all of that. Plus, they also get like a remote working sort of fee, something to the tune of like $5 to $10 a week, or like $50 to $100 a week, depending on the company. But what that sort of like covers is things like gym memberships and getting coffee and like that kind of stuff to sort of like get yourself set up. So that initial setup cost might go away for some people, because all they needed they already had a computer because they were doing design work at university or whatever, but they just needed a good pair of headphones that had like noise canceling on them to get them out of that. So that $300 like was able to be used towards that, right? What has the company worked on before, right? Like, how have they worked in a remote relationship before? Are they well equipped to do this? What are the company's values, and do they match your own? So that goes for just like every job, but it's really crucial in remote work as well. Something's happening with my Figma. I'm not quite sure that there. So when do you need to connect with other team members and or clients and allow for time difference? So what I mean by that is, like, again, like I'm in Australia, there is one hell of a time difference between here and the US, right? So right now it's 7:30 in the morning. For a lot of you, it's like 4, 5, 6 p.m., right? I actually work with one of the guys in Portugal from Designlab, and he's pretty much the exact opposite like time frame. So right now, I think it's like yeah, close to midnight or something like that for him. So as I'm waking up, he's sort of like going to bed, and, and vice versa. So that can be really hard, especially if you're trying to look at like 9 to 5 sort of like work schedules. Like there actually is no overlap. So what I do is I meet up with him at like 8 o'clock at night, and that's sort of like just like a mid-morning for him, so that we can sort of like have that conversation. And we had to like figure out that, right? That didn't just happen naturally, like, right? We had to actually talk about that. And it seems silly, but yeah, like some people just don't talk. So you need to reach out to other team members and your clients and know what the time difference is around you. All right. Then we've got some links. So these are the same links that I have in the chat, but this is more for the people who are watching a little bit later. So I'll leave it up on the screen for a second. Yeah, Envision, Basecamp, The Future, and my own personal Notion page. All these are like little tips and tricks for you if you're considering working as a remote worker, or if you already are and you're trying to then sort of see like how can I optimize some things and how do I get better at that kind of stuff. So Envision, both Envision and the Future, they're talking to some of their designers and looking at like how they work at home and do what they need to do. Basecamp, they originally were called 37 Signals. They have written a book on this. They've been doing remote work for like a long time at this point. I think it's like close to 10 years. So they've been doing remote work for a very long time. So they're very, very good at at doing all of this. So there's a book, there's a few videos, and there's some resources in there. So that's probably like the quintessential like link there. And then my Notion page. So I've got a few links in there for remote jobs and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a few things in there so that you can look for a remote job if you so wish. But all right, that's it from me, guys. Now it's time for questions. So I'll hand it over back to Emily.
Thanks, Kieran. So I hope everyone enjoyed the last 30 minutes of Kieran talking to us about how remote life is going. I'm very much like Kieran. I do like to be by myself. I do like to be able to just kind of go heads down on my own at home and just get my work done. Not saying that I don't think meetings in person are useful. They sometimes are, but for the most part, I am someone who just really enjoys working remotely and managing my own time and my work. But great, so we're gonna go jump into questions. We have a lot of related questions here. So I'm gonna start kind of at the top based on the most popular one. So the first one is from Barbara, and she's asking, as a student with no design background, I feel like I'd be missing out on learning from seeing other designers work. Thoughts on working remotely for brand new UX designers?
Yeah, it can be a little bit hard, but having that, again, communication open and sort of saying like, okay, well, things like Figma are a really big thing, right? I was able to screen share using Figma just then and show you how I would create something like this or do that, right? But it's really up to you as a junior designer to also like ask questions, right? Like don't solely rely on the person like showing you through the ropes to give you everything on a silver platter, unfortunately, because as senior designers we can sometimes like get tunnel vision and sort of like think about like, oh, we've been doing that for a million years, of course you know how to do that, right? Like we don't even think about it sometimes. So like creating like something like a simple component like a button, right? Like we might know that, okay, it has to be like at least 44 pixels high, like around like 16 pixels for the font size and like 4 pixels rounded and like have like this like border and this like drop shadow. And we do that in like 3 seconds. And then you're like, whoa, like where did that 44 pixels come from? Where did that 16 pixels come from? Where did that like 4 pixels rounded come from? Like so on and so forth, right? So tools like Figma enable that. And I think it's a good thing to say, like, just again, like that transparency, raise your hand and sort of say, hey, like I need help with this one. This is something that like I don't quite understand. I'm not sure where you're getting this from. And can you explain that to me? And those little tiny things can be the difference from you, like learning about something or just, getting breezed by. But yeah, it's obviously it's not ideal, right? But yeah, the remote work for a junior designer is going to be a lot harder. That's for sure.
Definitely. And especially because we're remote, right? Like we need to kind of, I know a lot of us, especially when we're going to be jumping into new careers, we are going to have a little bit of imposter syndrome. We're going to feel a little bit kind of timid about wanting to ask questions, but really being a UX designer, it's great to have a curious mind. It's great to ask questions. It's just knowing how to ask those questions and how to ask for help. Most designers that I've worked with, they're more than happy to help. It's just more that you do have to kind of put your foot forward and ask those first questions. Awesome. Yep. All right. So this one, from Drew. So this one's a little bit related. So he's saying, and asking, I doubt employers are wanting to train new UX designers remotely, putting UXA grads at a big disadvantage for the indefinite future. Not a specific question, but this is a big hurdle we all must get over before we can even apply the concepts from this lesson. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, I mean, I doubt employers are wanting to train UX designers. Yeah, that's a pretty big call, right? So, for example, if the job is saying that I want a junior designer, like I know what a junior designer can do. There are some companies that think junior designers need 3 years and they need to know how to do HTML and CSS and they need to also know how to ride a horse. Like there's all kinds of like crazy stuff, right? And like that is completely up to that company. That's the company's prerogative to think that what a junior designer is capable of doing versus what a senior designer is capable of doing. I know exactly what I'm getting myself into when I'm hiring a junior designer. I know exactly that I'm going to need at least like 3 to 6 months to like ramp them up to get them even working on production ready stuff. Like I have no doubts in my mind like what they're doing. But yeah, there are some companies that have no idea what hiring a junior designer means. So it really comes down to the company. So I wouldn't just sort of say like all employers, or I doubt employers are wanting to train UX designers remotely. So there is a little bit there of a little bit of nihilism there in the tone. But yeah, don't worry about that. Like what I'd sort of say is train yourself. Like if you feel as though that there are things that are missing in your knowledge, like gaps in your knowledge, like I said, like know yourself, know what you're good at, know what you're bad at. This is something that I go through with my designers that are going through UX Academy. We actually talk through a technical skills and a soft skills document, and I sort of like get them to rate themselves through a 0 to 10 and get them to say like, okay, I have no idea what like basics of JavaScript are. Like I have no idea what DOM manipulation means, right? And then so they rate themselves as 0, right? Then I like have some other students who know exactly what DOM manipulation is. Like they know how to do it, they know how it works, and they also know how to explain it to someone else. So they rate themselves as a 10 for that. So there's all different levels of different knowledge that you can sort of have as a junior designer, but it's really understanding where you are in that list. So write down your skills, figure out like what you're good at, what you're bad at. If you're seeing things in remote job or any job really, applications where they're saying like you need this skill, this skill, this skill, this skill, write those down and see like and do the research, like figure out like what you do know, what you don't know. And better yet, like if you've got any suggestions that you keep seeing this thing or that thing on job applications, like reach out to the Designlab staff. It's always good to like, we might have some stuff that's coming up in the curriculum. Like I'm helping out with the curriculum team at the moment, and I'm doing some of that stuff at the moment. So like, I know that there are some stuff that we haven't been teaching that we really want to teach. So reach out and tell us like what you want to sort of see. But yeah, like try not to be too down on yourself. Like we definitely there are definitely like hurdles there, but it's not all darkness. There is some light at the end of the tunnel there.
There definitely is. So for those of you who is this the first time where you're hearing from me, you're meeting me, I used to be a Designlab student, a UXA student as well. And the one thing my mentor told me to keep in mind was that oftentimes job recs are written by recruiters. So they may just list anything and everything on there. So it may not actually be what's required of the job. Even if the title has senior or mid-level, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're only willing to take a mid-level or senior level. A lot of the times as a junior designer, I got my jobs because I was given feedback that I was very passionate about when I interviewed, when I spoke, and when I had answered questions. So a lot of it really just comes from your passion and understanding and your willingness to learn and just kind of dive deeper. All right. Cool. So moving on. So we have a few questions of this nature, but essentially multiple people are wanting to know how, tips on how to get freelance work. Are there certain platforms you recommend? Can they even be a freelancer without any experience? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so it's hard to start straight away remote freelancing, right? Like that's a different level. I would say do local freelancing to start, right? There are always like restaurants around you, like pizza shops, like Chinese places, like whatever the case may be, that you can start off really, really small. They're usually like local and family run, and you can do a Squarespace or Webflow site, and you can work something out with them, right? They may not have like $5,000 to put down on a website, right? But you might be able to work out like, hey, maybe I can get like half price pizza from you for the next year, or like whatever the case may be, right? But the really cool thing about like website design is there actually is like a built-in recurring revenue there. So there's like hosting, for example. So things like Webflow make it really, really easy to set this up. So if you, let's say that you build like, let's say that you just want to sort of like start your career and like you don't really have a portfolio yet. You don't really have like anything to sort of like show your current clients, like how you might be able to serve them in the best way possible. Like you might be able to go to them and say, look, I'll do this. I'll do the initial work for free. And then like, but you pay me like the $50 a month or $100 a month to keep the site running, whatever. Right. It really, really depends on like your skill level, how good you are at like salesmanship and all that kind of stuff, as to like what you can sort of like work out. But I would start local. Start like in like the thing across the street, because they've probably seen you around. They probably even know where you live because they see you come out of your door and come to the pizza place, right? Like so they know that you're a local. That's where I would start. So that like I've had students that have done like this is more for the capstones in phase 2 of UXA, UX Academy, is that they've done stuff like bakeries and like restaurants that are near them. They've done like some of them even have done like government organizations and stuff like that. Local, I'm really passionate about. And yeah, I'd love to get into that. So there's all different ways of you like jumping in and doing something like that for yourself, like gyms even. There's heaps and heaps of gyms around. Like, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like an actual physical establishment, right? A lot of these places like, and hairdressers and salons and stuff like that, a lot of them are doing it off of a Facebook page still. And for you to take that Facebook page and make it into a website, they feel like $1 million. And you might even be able to do maybe even their business card or their logo and do other like little add-ons from there. So it's a really good way for you to sort of like see what's like around you first, and then like work towards remote freelance. Because remote freelance, like I said, is another ball game. You're now competing with literally everyone around the world, right? That's a hard thing to do. You're also competing with people who are able to underprice you because the US dollar to their currency is a lot more strong and is able to buy them a lot more things. So like, yeah, so you need to like look at that and sort of like figure out like what works for you and sort of see like, so I sort of see like mentions of like freelance.com and Upwork and a few of those kinds of things. Yeah, like those are all great, but just keep in mind that you are going to be like working on a much bigger scale. There's a lot more competition because of that. So what I'd sort of say is start local first, and then expand out from there.
Totally. And I guess a follow-up to that is if we have students who are going on to Upwork or freelance.com and they are looking for work, there's a question asking, is bringing down the price to become attractive more harmful than helpful?
Exactly.
do you think it'd be worth them kind of exploring, at least to test the waters to kind of lower their price? Or do you think that it's something that they need to gauge their own value?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on like what you're aiming for. If you're aiming to become a millionaire, you're probably freelance probably isn't for you, right? The first thing that you want to sort of do is get those first couple of clients. So you might have to undercut yourself, right? Like that's what I've had to do for stuff where I've like put myself out there and sort of said, look, I don't really want to like undercut myself because like I need to put food on the table. I need to pay rent and all that kind of stuff. But I know that because it's a website, it's actually like a longer term relationship. I'm actually going in it for the long game. And if I have, let's say that I want to make $100,000 a year, right? So like I want to let's make it easy for me because my brain isn't active quite yet because it's 7 a.m. So let's say that there's 12 months in a year and you're all getting like $50 from that. So that's like $600 a year for a client, right? So if you then like ramp that up, if you go to 10 clients, that's like 6,000. If you go to 100 clients, that's 600,000, right? Or 60,000, sorry, and so on and so forth. So depending on like your recurring revenue model, you could pretty much live off just recurring revenue if you get to that point. So that's what I sort of say here is that figure out if you're trying to do short gains or long-term gains, and look at like what you're trying to do. So if it's like Upwork, they usually are like just one-off hits, right? And that can be really like demotivating. That they sort of say like, oh, do a whole app for $100, and you're just like, are you kidding? Like, okay, no, I'm going to pass on that. So use your better judgment. Like, know what you're getting yourself into. If it's in it for the long term, like I would say yes, you can like use that underpricing strategy. But if it's for a short term gain, it's probably not worth it. So stick to your guns and know like what you're going to do from there.
Definitely. And something else my mentor told me was really ask yourself, what do you think your time is worth? Just because it is going to take a lot of time, and there's going to be a lot of time that's unaccounted for when you do talk to a client. So that's definitely a question to ask yourself. All right. Let's see. We have quite a few still related, but I think I want to bring it down to something. All right. So we have, how do you gauge your level of expertise when you have few to no people to compare your skills to? How do you determine your value? How do you determine your worth? How do you even say, I know how to do this confidently?
Yeah. I sort of see that quite a bit with my students as well, in terms of like I actually say don't compare yourself to the others, right? In terms of your skills. So when I was sort of saying that 0 to 10, I'm not saying that 10 is you're the best in it in the world, right? It's more that you're able to effectively explain it to someone else who is then able to understand and use that, right? So for example, like the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript sort of thing, you might be able to know what I don't know, like the box model is in CSS, right? So you might know like that might be a 10 for you, but then like I said, JavaScript DOM manipulation, you might not have any clue of what that is. So just taking that first step of like knowing what you do know and what you don't know is a really good one. So I would sort of say there are things where it's going to be hard not to compare yourself, right? Because you sort of see stuff on Dribble, you see stuff on like even Designlab when you upload your stuff, like you sort of see everybody else doing it. My number one piece of feedback for a lot of students is like, don't look at the other submissions as you're uploading stuff, because you got to realize that the other people are also learning, right? They're also like doing something, right? So I would sort of say that they don't know what they're talking about either. So look at what we're giving to you, look at what how we're giving it to you, and so on and so forth, and do it the way that you think you should be doing it. And then if you miss the mark, then we can talk about that. We can like jump in and talk about that. But really for me, like knowing what skills you do have and what you don't have, there's a really good Jared Spool talk on this about how do we design designers. So I'll quickly Google that. But how do we design designers? And he sort of like talks about all the skills that you need as a technical, like in terms of technical skills, in terms of soft skills, as well as skills that you'll only learn on the job. Like things like, what is agile? What are like the best marketing practices? What is the ROI on this feature, like so on and so forth. But this one was a couple of years ago at this point, like 5 or so years ago. But it still rings true as to what things that you need. So I'm just going to put this into the chat. If you're watching this a little bit later, just type in "how do we design designers" into Google, and Jared Spool with SPOOL. It's pretty easy to find. But yeah, that's what I'd sort of say is like, look at what you do know, look at what you don't know, and fill the gaps with whatever like knowledge that you are missing.
Yep. Being a UX designer always means you're staying on top of trends. You're always learning. There's not just one way to do one thing. And you guys will come to learn that as you guys go through different jobs. Not every team's the same. Every process is going to be different. So really it's just you fine-tuning or learning and fine-tuning what works for you, and then making sure that can kind of adjust to what the business needs. Awesome. So
yeah, and or just one thing on that is like what I also say to my students is that I'm not a 10 for all of the skills as well, right? There's still things that I'm learning, and I've been doing it for over 10 years at this point, right? Like there's still things that like I'm really bad at and I'm really crappy at. So I keep learning stuff. And then there's a new version of iOS. There's a new version of Android. There's like HTML, like in CSS standards change. Browsers are updated to like use the latest like CSS and HTML and stuff like that. Right. There's all these things that are just like constantly moving forward that that you need to stay on top of. That it's an ever evolving like skill set. So yeah, like I said, even after 10 years, like I still have imposter syndrome for things. So yeah, don't don't worry about it. Like it is pervasive throughout your whole career.
Imposter syndrome will last basically throughout your entire career. So it is okay. You have a support group right here. So getting into more tools. So we have some people asking, are there any tools that you recommend for documentation, collaboration, and I guess group facilitation?
Yeah, there's things like Miro or Miro. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that one. Mural, like Figma, of course, Whimsical, like Google Docs. Like there's millions of them out there. The main thing these days is that you're going to need an internet connection. There's no like way around it. And that's why I think that Figma is taking off right now, is because you're able to collaborate with that. So for design, I typically use Figma. For like documentation and that kind of stuff, that's usually like Google Docs. And sometimes it's also using Notion. Notion is also something that I'm a really big fan of. But Notion is sort of like a just like a note-taking app on steroids. It's a little bit crazy that thing. You can use it as a very plain Jane sort of like text editor, or you can go to the next level and like put in like a calendar in there, like a board view, like a Trello view in there. You can do all kinds of like crazy stuff in there. So for me, like that's what I use for a lot of it. I also like Notion because it actually integrates with Figma and Whimsical, which is another tool that I use. So you can actually put an iframe of the Figma board into Notion. So if you're showing off something to a client, you show them the Notion page, which has all of your documentation, your Trello board of like everything, like the progress it's doing. But then you can also have a live embed of the Figma page. So as you update something in Figma, it's then actually updated in Notion as well. So same sort of thing goes for Whimsical. So Whimsical is what I use for things like sitemaps and user flows and stuff like that. It's very, very similar to like to the others like Mural and Miro and all that kind of stuff. I just like it. It's like they're all pretty much the same. And yeah, like that one there, like again, live embed into Notion. It works really well. So that for me is like a really great one to use if you're looking for that.
Yep. And I think what's great about a lot of our tools, a lot of tools that designers use nowadays, there's so many integrations and there's so many tools that just want to work with other tools. So really the possibilities are endless in terms of what's available to you and how you make it work for you. All
Exactly.
right. So we are wrapping up, but let's see. We have... Well, okay, here's one. So are there any platforms that you recommend? So I guess, people who are starting out in UX design or, maybe just even starting their career, like, are there any platforms that you would recommend where they can go ahead and ask questions just to other designers, things of that nature, that's not on Facebook, that's not on LinkedIn, just more of maybe a Slack community that you can think of?
Yeah, like I'm a really big proponent of like little Slack communities like this. If you're not a part of it already, like there's one for like UX Academy, there's one for like the foundations course, and so on. We also have like things where there's like meetups and stuff like that. Obviously, like the meetup scene is a little bit dead right now, but there are like places where you can like have meetups that will do that kind of stuff. For me, in Australia, there's actually like an Aussie designers like Slack. That's mostly filled with like senior designers. So we sort of like talk about like higher level sort of stuff. And this is sort of like getting into like meta level design thinking of like how do we design tools and stuff like that. And like how do we like do all that kind of stuff. So find your people. Everybody is different. Everybody's going to want to like learn at different levels. Like for some people that might be like designer news, for example. That might be Reddit. That might be Twitter. That might be Dribble. That might be Behance. Like some people find their group, their people in those kinds of communities. It really just depends on what you're looking for. But I'm not looking for like critical feedback on my design. I'm looking for like what is the next like coolest thing, and really like just talk about design or not talk about design, but talk with like-minded people and be able to do that. So yeah, for me, like that's Slack, that's Twitter, that's all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yep. I will say that yesterday I was on Twitter and someone actually went on there and said, hey, anyone who's a designer, a design manager of some sort, could I please get your feedback on something that I'm working on? And there were 100 and something comments and a 1,000 likes and 1,000 retweets. So there is a world out there who is just more than willing to help and give you their opinion. So yeah. All right, last question, and I think this just kind of wraps it all up and just kind of brings home your main point of this presentation. Do you think that the digital nomad lifestyle is feasible for a designer, a UX designer in general?
Yeah. Like obviously it depends on what type of UX designer you are, right? So there's all different types in terms of like, are you able to do UX research, right? Like, are you like, if the people that you're trying to research is in a certain country, then yeah, that's probably not going to be feasible for you. So like I worked at a company called AutoGuru previously, and there's probably no way that I would have been able to use like to do remote work from there, because their whole thing was only people within Australia, right? So I would have to be constantly meeting up and researching people within Australia. So if you're doing more attitudinal and qualitative analysis, so things like interviews or quantitative and attitudinal, something like a survey, you might be able to get away with the survey because you're not doing something face-to-face. But as soon as you're doing anything in the qualitative realm, like interviews or like a contextual inquiry or an ethnographic field study that's in the behavioral realm, that sort of stuff, you need to be on the ground, like helping people out, right? So there are like ways around that, of course. Like if you're doing more of a like a digital platform, right? So something like Figma, something like if you're working at the Figma team, if you're working at the InVision team, if you're working at the Notion team or the Google Docs team, right? You don't have to physically look at how they're doing their job, right? You can like have meetings and do all that kind of stuff. It actually bodes well for you if you're able to communicate effectively over like something like this, like an interview kind of thing, right? So for me, like, yes, it is possible, but it highly depends on the company that you go to work for, as well as the actual job role that you're doing. For me right now, I personally could, right? Because I'm doing mentoring, I'm doing curriculum changes, I'm doing like freelance for clients. So I particularly could, right? But yeah, at the previous job at Older Guru, where all of our clients were in Australia and only in Australia, and like I had to see like how people were treating their cars and how they were like doing that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's absolutely no way. Like otherwise they would have to like carry around like a little webcam and show me their cars and show me around their workshop and stuff like that, right? There's just no way for me to do that. So yeah, completely up to the job that you're going for, as well as the position that you're in. But it is possible, yes.
Yep. And I would probably add on, and I know you touched on this earlier, just be real with what you know you can do and what your limits are. If you absolutely just know that you need to be around people, you just can't be by yourself and you need to work around people, that's something that you need to recognize. So basically just set expectations with yourself and just ask yourself these hard questions. And if you just don't know, you can always try it. And if it doesn't work, that's how you know you tested it out. Awesome. So those are pretty much the questions we have time to cover. But for the most part, everyone kind of asked around the same question. So thank you to everyone who attended. Love having you guys here. I really hope that we kind of made just kind of the whole idea of remote working as a designer, whether or not you're new or experienced, recorded version, and then we will also share it out in the Designlab communities if you are a student. All right. Thank you, everyone. We are all done. Have a good day.
Awesome.
Thank
No
you.
worries. See you later. Bye.
Bye.